A locked trunk in a forgotten Alpine chalet holds a secret that could rewrite history. Inside are documents hidden for over a century, tying together Gilded Age heiresses and European royalty in a web of scandal. You are about to uncover a real-life treasure hunt through time, where personal letters and official forgeries reveal truths that were meant to stay buried forever. By the end, you will understand how a single discovery in a dusty attic can change everything we thought we knew about power and privilege. What drove these wealthy socialites to hide their most explosive secrets so far from home? And what forbidden love or dangerous alliance were they trying to protect? What is the most surprising secret you have ever found tucked away in an old family possession perched high in the Swiss Alps? The chalet was a fortress of solitude and splendor. Its ornate wooden balconies overlooked pristine valleys, and its stone foundations were built into the mountainside by order of a reclusive industrial baron in the late 1800s. This was not just a holiday home. It was a sanctuary for the global elite, a place where American steel money met old European titles far from prying eyes. The architecture was a deliberate statement of power, with carved eaves, vast windows framing dramatic peaks, and interiors paneled in rare woods. The very remoteness that offered breathtaking views also provided the ultimate privacy. There were no casual visitors, no neighboring estates, just the imposing silence of the mountains. This isolation made it the perfect vault. While guests downstairs enjoyed legendary parties and exquisite dinners, the most sensitive documents could be hidden away in a locked trunk in a forgotten attic, resting for decades amidst the scent of aged timber and cold, thin air. The chalet did not just host secrets, it became one, its luxurious facade masking the truths buried within its walls. Why would someone choose a place of such beauty to conceal something so dangerous? Her name was Beatrice, though in the society pages they called her the Snow Queen. She was the daughter of a railroad magnate, an American princess whose dowry was a fleet of steamships and a private art collection. Her marriage to a cash-poor European count was a transaction celebrated on two continents, a union of New World wealth and Old World prestige. The wedding portrait, splashed across newspapers, showed a serene young woman in lace and pearls, but it was a carefully crafted illusion. The Count was a distant, often absent man, more interested in the restoration of his ancestral shadow than in his wife. Beatrice found herself trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by servants and splendor, but achingly alone. The grand tour of European capitals, the endless rounds of tedious court ceremonies, these were just elaborate distractions from a profound emptiness. She was a dollar princess, a title she had purchased with her father's fortune and her own future. What does a woman do when she has everything the world says she should want, and yet possesses nothing that truly matters? In that silent desperation, secrets are born. Beatrice began to live a double life, her public face a mask of aristocratic composure, while her private world filled with whispered conversations, clandestine meetings, and a growing cache of documents she knew could never see the light of day. The man she married was Count Victor von Amsberg of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, a name that echoed with the fading glory of an empire. His family, though stripped of its direct political power, still wielded immense social influence across the capitals of Europe. They were the gatekeepers of tradition, their approval a necessary currency for anyone wishing to move in the highest circles. But this influence was a fragile thing, propped up by reputation and a carefully managed public image. Victor's branch of the family was notoriously impoverished, their vast estates mortgaged, their palaces in a state of genteel decay. The union with Beatrice was not merely convenient. It was a financial rescue mission disguised as a fairy tale. Her father's millions would replaster the walls of their ancestral homes and refill their empty coffers. And in return, the von Amsberg name would grant the industrialist's daughter a title of breathtaking prestige. Yet this transaction was fraught with peril. The Count's position depended entirely on the family's perceived moral and political integrity. Any hint of scandal, any whisper of impropriety, could shatter their standing forever. The most dangerous threat was not financial, but personal. Victor had a history of attachments that the rigid etiquette of his world could not condone, relationships that, if exposed, would see him ostracized and the family name dragged through the mud. The pressure to maintain a flawless facade was immense, a constant, silent strain that governed every public appearance and every private decision. This is why the documents Beatrice began to collect were so explosive. They were not just love letters or private grievances. They were evidence of the very truths that could topple a centuries-old house from its precarious perch. They detailed secret agreements, hidden financial transfers to silence certain individuals, and correspondence that revealed the entire marriage was a strategic lie designed to conceal the Count's true affections. In a world where perception was everything, these papers were dynamite. Hiding them was not an option, it was a necessity for survival. So they were sent away, far from the prying eyes of Vienna or Paris, to a silent fortress in the Alps where the only witnesses were the mountain peaks. What do you do when the only thing protecting your family is a secret that could destroy it? The chalet passed through generations, its story fading into a whisper. Its most recent inheritor was a woman named Clara, a historian living in London who had only known the property from faded photographs. The legal documents arrived without fanfare, a bequest from a great aunt she had met only once. Along with the deed, tucked inside a leather-bound folio of property surveys, was a single sheet of parchment. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, a woman's script from another century. It was a note from Beatrice, her ancestor. It spoke not of the chalet's beauty, but of its purpose. "My dearest hope," it read, "is that this sanctuary remains undisturbed. Should the winds of change ever threaten, you must protect the sealed portfolio. It holds the truth of our compact." The note was unsigned and undated, a ghost of a message with no further explanation. What was this compact, and what truth was so volatile it needed a code word, the Swiss papers, to identify it? For Clara, this was not just a piece of family history. It was a lock without a key. The chalet was no longer just a building. It was a vault waiting to be opened. And this cryptic letter was the first clue in a real-life treasure hunt that would span continents and centuries. The mystery was no longer about why secrets were hidden, but about what those secrets actually were. The first documents Clara found were not love letters, but lies made of paper and ink. Tucked beneath a false bottom in the old trunk lay a collection of forged passports and identity papers. These were not crude fakes. They were masterpieces of deception, crafted with an artist's precision. Each passport bore a different name, a different nationality, but the same photograph, a face carefully altered with different hairstyles and expressions. The stamps were perfect replicas of official border controls from France, Switzerland, and Italy. Why would a countess need such dangerous tools? For a woman like Beatrice, trapped in a gilded cage, these documents were not just for illicit travel. They were her only hope of escape. Imagine the desperation required to plan a life under a new name, to imagine walking away from every title and possession. Perhaps the threat was not just personal unhappiness, but a looming political crisis. The fading empires of Europe were powder kegs, and a scandal involving a Habsburg-Lorraine count could have been the spark that ignited a wider conflict. These papers were an insurance policy, a way to vanish if the carefully constructed world of her marriage ever collapsed. The risk was astronomical. In an era before digital records, a forgery had to be flawless to pass a customs agent's manual inspection. A single misplaced watermark, a slightly off-color ink, and the entire charade would crumble, resulting in public disgrace, imprisonment, or worse. The very existence of these documents proves that Beatrice was not just a passive victim of her circumstances. She was a strategist, preparing for a future where the only way to survive was to erase herself completely. What kind of life was she planning to lead under one of these false names? And what was so terrible that becoming a ghost was her best option? Buried beneath the forged passports was a small, wax-sealed packet of letters. The paper was brittle, the ink a faded brown, but the words were a thunderclap. They spoke of a child, a boy, born in a secluded Swiss clinic in the spring of 1902. His birth certificate listed the mother as Beatrice, but the father's name was a carefully inked dash. This was not the Count's child. The discovery of this single document recontextualized everything. Those expertly forged passports were not just an escape plan for one, they were a blueprint for two, a mother and a son whose very existence defied the rigid laws of inheritance and honor. A baptismal record from a tiny village church, tucked between the pages of a prayer book, named the boy Alexander, a name with no significance in the von Amsberg lineage. Private letters written in a coded intimacy between Beatrice and a trusted confidante detailed the agonizing decision to place the infant with a discreet family in the countryside. His origins a secret guarded by a handful of people and a mountain of silence. In the world of European royalty, an illegitimate heir was not merely a personal embarrassment. It was a political crisis. It threatened bloodlines, challenged legal succession, and could invalidate international treaties built upon dynastic marriages. For a family like the von Amsbergs, clinging to the last vestiges of their power, such a scandal would have been catastrophic. It would have provided their enemies with all the ammunition needed to strip them of their remaining privileges and social standing. The entire financial rescue of their house, funded by Beatrice's dowry, would have crumbled into dust overnight. The Countess was not just hiding an affair. She was safeguarding a human being whose life was a direct threat to an entire empire's fragile social order. The Alpine Chalet became more than a hiding place for documents. It was the silent guardian of a lost prince. What became of the boy named Alexander? And did he ever learn the truth of the magnificent, gilded world he was born to leave behind? The most intimate documents were not hidden with the others. They were sewn into the lining of a silk evening cloak, a garment of deep sapphire blue that whispered of midnight balls and forbidden assignations. Here, the voice of Beatrice von Amsberg changed entirely. Gone was the restrained tone of the official forgeries and the coded notes about the child. In their place was the raw, unfiltered passion of a woman deeply in love. The letters were addressed to Emil, a man whose name appears nowhere in the official family histories. He was a painter, a bohemian from Prague who lived in a garret and saw the world in colors and shadows, a universe away from the monochrome rigidity of court life. This was the true heart of the scandal. A countess of the Habsburg court was not merely conducting a discreet affair. She was pouring her entire soul out to a man her world would have deemed utterly unsuitable, a commoner with no title, no fortune, and dangerously modern ideas. His profession alone made him an unacceptable suitor, an artist who challenged conventions both on and off the canvas. The language of her letters is breathtaking in its intensity. She writes of stolen afternoons in his sunlit studio, the smell of turpentine and fresh paint, a perfume more intoxicating than any French fragrance. She describes the texture of his work-worn hands against her skin, a stark contrast to the white-gloved formality of her husband. My dearest Emil, one letter begins, "In this room with you, I am not a countess. I am simply a woman, and for the first time in my life, I feel that is enough." This was not just romance, it was rebellion. Every word was a conscious rejection of the transactional world she inhabited. The secrecy required was a dangerous, exhausting game. They developed a system of drops and signals, using a particular flower vendor in the city or a specific book left on a windowsill to indicate a safe meeting place. A single misstep, a letter intercepted by a curious maid or a loyalist footman, would have meant utter ruin. The Count's family would have moved swiftly to annul the marriage, seizing her dowry and casting her out, while Emil would have faced imprisonment or exile. These were not the cautious plans of a strategist, like the forged passports. These were the desperate, heartfelt words of a woman who had found a reason to live and was risking everything to grasp it, even if only for a few fleeting moments. What would you risk for a love that your entire world has forbidden? Yet the most dangerous secrets were not those of the heart, but of the vault, beneath the silk lining of the cloak, tucked into a leather folio, were bank ledgers from institutions in Zurich and Geneva. These were not the ordinary account books of a noble household. They detailed a complex, clandestine financial network, a river of gold flowing in absolute secrecy. The entries showed vast sums, amounts that could fund small armies, being transferred under numbered accounts and corporate aliases. This was Beatrice's fortune, the dowry that was supposed to restore the von Amsberg estates, being systematically moved beyond her husband's or his family's reach. She was not just hiding a child or a lover. She was securing her financial independence in a world where a woman, especially a married one, had almost no legal right to her own wealth. Imagine the intricate planning this required. Each transaction had to be approved by a trusted, discreet lawyer. Funds were likely funneled through shell corporations, their ownership obscured by layers of paperwork. The movement of money had to mimic legitimate investments or charitable donations to avoid raising suspicion from the count's financial advisors. This was a high-stakes chess game played with assets worth millions in today's currency. The ledgers exposed the profound distrust at the core of her marriage. The prenuptial agreement, a document meant to protect the von Amsberg inheritance, had become a cage she was determined to pick. By diverting these funds, she was not merely acting out of spite. She was creating a life raft. This secret wealth would support her son, Alexander, in his hidden life. It could finance a complete disappearance for her and Emil, allowing them to live comfortably under new identities, far from the gilded prisons of European high society. Every entry in those ledgers was a quiet act of rebellion, a line item in a plan for freedom. What does it say about a marriage when a woman feels her greatest security lies in a secret bank account, guarded by the silence of the Swiss Alps? But the most chilling documents were those that detailed the cold, hard currency of silence. Beneath the bank ledgers lay a slim folder of correspondence that was not written in the language of love or rebellion, but in the stark, clinical prose of extortion. These were the blackmail files. One letter, typed on plain paper and unsigned, demanded a specific sum in Swiss francs for the return of a packet of letters between the Countess and Emil. The writer knew the exact location of their last meeting and described the cloak Beatrice had worn, a detail so intimate it was a violation in itself. The threat was not vague, it was a precise instrument, calibrated to inflict maximum fear. Another document was a carbon copy of a statement written by a private investigator hired by the von Amsberg family. It did not contain accusations, but facts, dates, and locations of Beatrice's visits to the clinic where her son was born. This was not evidence gathered for a court of law. It was ammunition for a private war, a dossier compiled to control her. The most disturbing items were the receipts. They were not for dresses or jewels, but for payments made from a private account to several names, individuals who simply vanished from the record after the transaction was complete. These were the people paid to look the other way, to forget what they had seen, or to never speak of a child they helped bring into the world. Each receipt was a monument to a silenced voice, a life altered by the weight of a secret. This was the grim reality behind the gilded facade. The chalet was not just a sanctuary for secrets. It was an archive of compromises, a ledger of the human cost required to maintain an illusion. How many lives were quietly warped or broken to preserve the pristine surface of a single, powerful family's reputation? The final layer of the trunk held no more letters or ledgers, only a small, locked journal bound in faded green leather. Its pages were not filled with elegant script, but with a baffling array of symbols, numbers, and seemingly random words. This was Beatrice's most personal fortress, a diary written entirely in a secret code. In an age before digital encryption, such ciphers were the only way to ensure absolute privacy. High society was a hotbed of gossip, and a countess' private diary, if discovered, could be her undoing. The very act of creating this code was a declaration of war against the prying eyes of her world. Decrypting it was a monumental task, a puzzle that required understanding not just the system, but the woman who created it. Modern code breakers started with frequency analysis, searching for patterns. They looked for the most common symbols, guessing they might represent letters like E or T. They searched for repeated groups that could stand for common words like the, or, and. But this was not a standard military cipher. It was a deeply personal one, likely built from a shared secret, perhaps a favorite book or a private phrase known only to Beatrice and Emil. The key might have been a line of poetry or the title of a painting. Without that key, the journal was just a collection of beautiful, meaningless marks. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A researcher, working late, noticed that one of the symbols, a small flower, matched a doodle in the margin of a letter from Emil. That tiny connection was the first thread pulled, slowly unraveling the entire system. The decoded entries were not grand conspiracies. They were the raw, unfiltered sound of a human soul under immense pressure. The words spoke of a deep, gnawing fear of discovery, of the constant strain of maintaining her composure at a state dinner, while her heart was racing with panic. She wrote of watching her son, Alexander, from a distance during one of her rare, carefully orchestrated visits, describing the pain of seeing him call another woman mother. She detailed her terror when a new servant with sharp, observant eyes joined the household staff. The code did not just hide her words, it liberated her voice, allowing her to express a level of vulnerability and despair she could never afford in her visible life. Why go to such extraordinary lengths to talk to yourself? Perhaps because in that coded silence, she could finally be honest. She could scream on paper without making a sound. The journal's final page was not filled with code, but with a drawing. It was an elaborate family tree, the kind found in the front of aristocratic histories, but this one was different. The ink lines were precise, the names written in a steady hand, but scattered throughout the branches were small, handwritten annotations in red ink. These tiny, furious marks told a second, secret history of the von Amsberg line, next to the name of a celebrated 18th century duke. A red arrow pointed to a footnote that read marriage contract void, true wife and children in France. Another note, beside a 19th century prince, stated simply, lineage secured by purchase testimony. The most shocking annotation, however, was the one closest to Beatrice's own time. A line was drawn from her husband, Count Victor, to a name that was not her own, connected by a small red heart. The name was that of a young man, a junior diplomat from a rival court. And beside it, Beatrice had written the single word, confirmed. This was not a chart of ancestry. It was a map of existential threats. The drawing revealed that the family's vaunted purity of bloodline was a carefully maintained fiction, a tapestry woven with threads of bigamy, illegitimacy, and concealed affection. The official tree, displayed in gilded frames for generations, was a public relations document. This hidden version was the truth, and it was weaponized information. For a noble house, legitimacy is everything. Their entire claim to power, property, and title rests upon an unbroken and legally sound line of descent. A single proven case of an illegitimate heir from centuries past could be used by distant relatives or political enemies to challenge ownership of estates, artworks, and even a family's standing at court. The von Amsbergs were not just protecting a secret about Beatrice. They were guarding a vault of secrets about themselves. a collection of historical vulnerabilities that, if exposed, could cause the entire structure to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Beatrice, by compiling this annotated tree, was not merely recording gossip. She was assembling the ultimate insurance policy. This single sheet of paper gave her leverage against the entire machinery of her husband's family. It demonstrated that their power was as fragile as the parchment it was written on, and that their judgment of her was the height of hypocrisy. Why would a family risk everything to silence one woman? Because she held the key to a closet full of skeletons, and she had just drawn a map to the door. The final piece of the puzzle was not a letter or a ledger, but a stark, clinical document folded tightly and sealed with a physician's wax insignia. It was a confidential medical report for Count Victor von Amsberg, dated just 6 months before his marriage to Beatrice was finalized. The diagnosis was a hereditary condition, a degenerative neurological ailment that the doctors of the era could only describe as a progressive familial tremor of the mind. In the blunt language of the time, it predicted a future of cognitive decline, a fate considered deeply shameful for a man destined to be the public face of an ancient dynasty. This was the true secret at the heart of the compact. The von Amsberg family had knowingly entered into a marriage with a healthy American heiress, all while concealing a medical truth that threatened not just Victor's future, but the very legacy of their bloodline. The immense pressure to produce a healthy, legitimate male heir was the central pillar of their entire arrangement. Yet the Count himself carried a gene that could shatter that dream. Imagine the conversations held behind closed doors, the cold calculation that went into this decision. Beatrice's fortune would save their estates, but her most vital role was to provide a son who would inherit her robust health, not his father's hidden vulnerability. Her entire existence within the marriage was predicated on a biological function she was never told the full truth about. For a woman of her intelligence, the gradual realization must have been a special kind of torment. She would have noticed the small, unexplained absences, the whispered consultations with physicians, the careful management of her husband's public appearances to hide any early signs of the condition. The social pressure to conceal this was absolute. In the rigid hierarchy of European royalty, physical and mental soundness were seen as reflections of divine favor and racial purity. A hereditary illness was not a private medical matter. It was a stain on the entire lineage, a weakness that political rivals could and would exploit to question the family's fitness to rule or even to hold their titles. The existence of this report explains the extreme measures taken to control Beatrice. Her independent spirit and her secret child were not just personal betrayals. They were existential threats to a dynasty living on borrowed time and a carefully constructed lie. The Chalet did not just hide her secrets. It also safeguarded the one that had trapped her in the first place. What does it mean when the foundation of a great family is not honor or tradition, but a diagnosed secret locked away in a Swiss attic? The most explosive documents were not personal at all. They were diplomatic. Tucked away in a steel lockbox within the trunk was a draft treaty, a document that should never have been in the hands of a private citizen. It was an unsigned agreement between the von Amsberg family and a rival, rising European power, a nation hungry for influence. The terms were staggeringly bold. In exchange for substantial, secret financial backing, The von Amsbergs would leverage their remaining political connections to block certain trade bills and advocate for the rival powers' territorial claims within the delicate balance of European politics. This was not statecraft, it was a shadow government, a private deal brokered by a cash-poor noble house using its name as its only remaining asset. Count Victor, and by extension Beatrice, were not just players in a social scandal. They were operatives in a clandestine geopolitical game. The personal stakes were now dwarfed by international consequences. The existence of this treaty recontextualizes every other secret in the Chalet. The immense pressure on Beatrice, the need for absolute secrecy, the terrifying reach of the blackmail. It was not just about hiding a child or a lover. It was about concealing an act that bordered on treason against their own class and country. The forged passports were not just an escape from a bad marriage. They were a potential exit strategy from a political firestorm. The secret bank accounts were not just personal freedom funds. They were the documented flow of payments for influence peddling. Beatrice was not merely the custodian of her own secrets. She was the unwilling guardian of a conspiracy that could have destabilized alliances and reshaped the map of Europe. Her personal rebellion was now inextricably linked to a high-stakes betrayal of the very system that gave her title its meaning. How far would a fading dynasty go to reclaim its power? And what happens when a single woman becomes the keeper of a truth that could start a war? A separate leather-bound book, its pages filled with a tight, efficient script, tells the story from the other side of the green baize door. This was the household ledger kept by the Chalet's head butler, a man named Joseph. On the surface, it recorded the mundane necessities of a great house, the cost of lamp oil, the price of firewood, the wages for the seasonal staff. But woven between these ordinary entries was a parallel, secret history. Joseph was more than a servant. He was a chronicler of conspiracy. His notations were a code of their own. A delivery of 6 cases of Bordeaux wine was logged alongside a parenthetical note. 1 crate diverted to the east turret. The east turret was a disused storage space, not a wine cellar. That single crate, delivered under cover of a common order, likely contained the very documents we have been uncovering. A visit from a seamstress for a simple gown alteration coincided with a cryptic entry. Guest in the blue room, the same sapphire blue of the cloak, where Beatrice hid her most passionate letters. The seamstress was a courier, and the blue room was a signal. Most chilling were the entries for unusual visitors. On a date that matches the private investigator's report found in the blackmail file, Joseph wrote, "Gentleman caller, presented card from Vienna, discussion with the Count in the library, duration 2 hours." Payment for services rendered 100 francs from the Count's private reserve. Here, in the butler's dispassionate hand, was the proof that the Count himself was aware of the investigation into his wife, and that he was directly funding the very machinery of surveillance and control being used against her. This ledger transforms our understanding of the household dynamics. The servants were not a faceless, obedient mass. They were active, knowing participants. Joseph, by meticulously recording these events, was creating his own insurance. He knew the value of information, and his ledger was a power base, a detailed account of who knew what and when. It proves the Count was not a distant, oblivious husband, but an active antagonist in a cold marital war. using his staff as both his eyes and his instruments. Why would a loyal servant keep such a dangerous record? Perhaps his loyalty was not to the master, but to the truth. Or perhaps he understood that in a house of secrets, the most valuable thing you can own is a list of them all. The winter of 1898 was unusually dry in the Alps. On the night of February 12th, a fire erupted in the Chalet's east wing, the very section housing the disused turret where secret crates were stored. It began not in a living area or kitchen, but in a remote storage room filled with old furniture and forgotten ledgers. The flames spread with a ferocious speed that veteran firefighters later called unnatural, consuming timber, tapestries, and paperwork with a focused intensity. Officially, the cause was a faulty electrical wire, a new and poorly understood installation, but the timing was impossibly convenient. The fire occurred just 1 week after a political scandal had erupted in Vienna, a scandal that directly implicated the von Amsberg family's closest allies. A parliamentary inquiry was announced, one with the power to subpoena financial records and private correspondence. The Chalet, that silent fortress, was suddenly the most dangerous place in Europe for certain documents to exist. The official inventory of losses, filed with the insurance company, listed a tragic but random assortment of items, antique furnishings, a collection of historic maps, several cases of vintage wine. Conspicuously absent was any mention of the locked trunk or its contents. The fire was a surgical strike. It obliterated the physical evidence of the blackmail files, the private investigators' reports, and any copies of the damning diplomatic treaty. It created a perfect veil of smoke and ash under which inconvenient truths could be permanently erased. Rumors persisted for decades. Locals whispered of shadowy figures seen near the estate on the night of the fire. The head butler, Joseph, made a final cryptic entry in his ledger the very morning of the blaze. A single line that read, "Special cleaning required for the east turret." He and his ledger vanished from the historical record immediately afterward, his fate as much a mystery as the fire's true origin. The official story was one of accidental tragedy. The unofficial truth, preserved in those lingering whispers, suggests a far darker reality, a controlled demolition of the past to protect a fragile future. What do you call a fire that burns away the evidence but leaves the suspicion perfectly intact? The final document in the trunk was not a letter or a ledger, but a declaration of war. It was a political manifesto written on thick, expensive parchment, its title boldly inscribed, "The Amsberg Claim, a Statement of Right and Retribution." The author was not Beatrice, but a man who signed himself Alexander, Prince of the Blood. This was her son, the lost boy hidden in the Swiss countryside, now grown into a man who knew exactly who he was and what had been stolen from him. The document was a thunderous indictment of the very family that had cast him out. It laid out, in precise legal and historical terms, his legitimate claim to the von Amsberg titles and estates, arguing that his mother's marriage, though built on a foundation of secrets, was legally binding and that he was its rightful heir. He accused his father, Count Victor, and the entire family council of fraud, of knowingly concealing the hereditary illness to secure a dowry under false pretenses, and of conspiring to disinherit him through a campaign of silence and lies. The manifesto was not a plea, it was a challenge. It detailed specific accusations against named rivals within the family, charging them with financial malfeasance and moral corruption, and it vowed to expose every hidden truth, from the secret treaties to the blackmail files, to the courts of Europe and the court of public opinion. This was the ultimate act of rebellion, a ghost from the Alpine Chalet returning to haunt the house that tried to erase him. He was not seeking acceptance, he was demanding restitution, and he held in his hands the very documents that could grant it. What does a prince without a kingdom do with the keys to the castle? He does not knock on the door, he prepares to tear down the walls. Behind a portrait of a stern ancestor, the frame itself held a secret. A small, tightly rolled parchment was concealed in a hollowed-out section of the gilded wood, a document far more revealing than the painting it bordered. It was a bill of sale, but not from any reputable gallery. This was a private transaction, dated during the height of the Second World War, for a collection of Renaissance drawings. The seller was a name infamous in the annals of art theft, a man who had systematically looted collections from families who had vanished into the terror of the era. The buyer was Count Victor von Amsberg. This was not an isolated case, tucked into the pages of a first edition volume of poetry. Another slip of paper listed crates and their contents, each piece identified by a code that matched the records of a looted museum in France. The von Amsbergs, patrons of the arts, had not merely acquired beautiful things. They had been active participants in one of history's greatest cultural plunders. Their magnificent collection, displayed as a symbol of their refined taste, was in part a monument to their moral compromise, a gallery of stolen memories bought for a fraction of their worth from those who had no right to sell them. Why would a family of such immense pride risk their reputation on illicit art? Because for a dynasty losing its power, possessing the treasures of those they considered rivals was the ultimate silent victory. It was a way to absorb the cultural capital of others, to literally hang their conquered history on their own walls. Each of these masterpieces was a trophy, and their true provenance was a secret more dangerous than any love affair. The documents hidden in the chalet were the only honest record of a collection built on lies, a truth so damning it had to be physically sewn into the fabric of the very art it described. What does it say about a family's legacy when its greatest treasures are someone else's stolen heirlooms? Another trunk was stacked beside the first, its leather worn to a different texture, its locks stamped with a different monogram. Inside, the scent of lavender and old paper told a different story, yet the secrets were cut from the same cloth. These were the papers of Elinor Standish, a Pittsburgh steel heiress who had married into a neighboring branch of the same European dynasty. She and Beatrice moved in the same glittering circles, their paths crossing at operas and state banquets. Two American dollar princesses performing the same role for rival factions of the same crumbling empire. On the surface, they were allies, a united front of new money and old blood. But the documents in this second trunk reveal a far darker truth, a silent war fought with smiles and sealed envelopes. Elinor was not a friend. She was a competitor in a deadly game for survival. Her own hidden correspondence shows she knew about Beatrice's son, Alexander, and saw him not as a tragedy, but as a weapon. In a letter to her own mother, Elinor wrote, If the von Amsberg line is proven corrupt, the succession falls to our branch. My son will have everything. This was not just jealousy. It was a calculated strategy for a dynastic coup. She actively cultivated informants within Beatrice's household, paying a lady's maid for trivial details about the countess's mood, her correspondence, even the frequency of her headaches. Each piece of information was a potential lever, a tiny crack she hoped to widen. The most chilling find was a carbon copy of an anonymous letter Eleanor had sent to a muckraking journalist in Vienna. It contained no direct accusations, only carefully phrased insinuations about the stability of a certain noble house and the curious reclusiveness of its countess. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could ignite a scandal without getting any soot on her own hands. This was the grim reality of their gilded world. These women, both trapped in similar gilded cages, were pitted against each other by the very system that imprisoned them. They could have been allies, but the structure of their lives made them rivals in a fight for a prize that was already turning to dust. Eleanor's own trunk contained her own set of forged passports and a secret bank account in Liechtenstein. She was preparing her own escape from the same gilded prison, even as she worked to ensure her rival would be the one left behind to face the consequences. What does it say about a society when the only path to safety is through the destruction of the person who shares your fate? The most formidable weapon in this silent war was not a blackmail letter or a secret treaty, but a simple court summons. Deep within the trunk, beneath the manifestos and the stolen art inventories, lay a sealed packet of legal documents from a lawsuit that never saw the light of a public courtroom. This was a civil action for breach of promise, filed by Beatrice against her own husband's family. The suit alleged that the von Amsbergs had knowingly violated the terms of the marriage contract by concealing the count's hereditary illness, a condition that fundamentally voided the agreement's core purpose of producing a healthy heir. She was not suing for divorce, but for fraud, demanding the return of her entire dowry and substantial punitive damages. The evidence annexed to the filing was devastating. It included the confidential medical report and sworn statements from physicians. For a family whose power was built on appearances, a public trial would have been an execution. The resulting scandal would have made them a laughingstock across Europe, their names synonymous with deceit and biological decay. Their political allies would have abandoned them. Their creditors would have called in their loans, and their social standing would have evaporated overnight. So they settled. The out-of-court agreement was a masterpiece of legal suppression. All documents were sealed by a judge's order. The court file was physically impounded, and every party, including their lawyers, was bound by a gag order under penalty of immense financial forfeiture. The settlement itself was a testament to their desperation. They returned a significant portion of Beatrice's fortune and granted her unprecedented separate maintenance, effectively buying her silence and her continued, if distant, participation in the family facade. This legal threat was the ultimate leverage, the reason the Chalet's secrets remained buried. It created a standoff, a mutually assured destruction. Beatrice held the power to destroy them in court, and they held the power to destroy her through the exposure of her son and her lover. The sealed lawsuit was the unspoken treaty that kept the peace. A Cold War fought with legal briefs instead of bullets, where the only victory was a continuation of the silence. What is the true cost of a settlement when the price is a lifetime of living a lie? The final artifact was not a document, but a silence. A heavy leather-bound photograph album, its spine cracked with age, sat at the very bottom of the second trunk. Its gilt-edged pages were filled with formal portraits and candid snapshots, a visual chronicle of a life lived in the public eye. Yet the story was not in the pictures that remained, but in the ones that were gone. Several pages had been meticulously sliced out, the cut lines razor straight, leaving only the brittle stubs of the missing paper and the faint ghost of an image pressed into the opposing page. One such ghost was the silhouette of a man, his shape outlined by a slight fading of the leather. The size and posture suggested a single figure, not a group. Another missing page was opposite a photograph of Beatrice standing on a terrace, her face turned not toward the camera, but slightly away, her expression one of quiet anticipation. The empty space beside her was a void where someone else should have been standing. These were not accidents or the work of time. They were deliberate, surgical erasures. The missing individuals were Emil, the painter, and Alexander, her son. Their physical removal from the family record was the ultimate act of denial, a visual confirmation that they never officially existed. An album is meant to be a curated narrative of a life, a collection of happy memories for future generations to admire. This one, with its gaps and absences, tells a far more honest story, one of love that had to be hidden and a child who had to be forgotten. It is a map of a heart, charted by the empty spaces where the most important people were meant to be. What does it mean when the truest record of a life is the shape of what has been torn away? The journey that brought these explosive papers to the mountain sanctuary was a masterpiece of clandestine logistics. They did not travel together in a single, conspicuous chest, but arrived in fragments, smuggled along separate routes by a small, trusted network. The diplomatic treaty likely left Vienna hidden within a diplomatic pouch, a pouch that never reached its intended recipient. A bribed courier would have diverted it to a neutral contact in Zurich, where it was transferred to a false bottom trunk belonging to a traveling opera company. The troops' route through the Alpine passes provided perfect cover, their carriages filled with props and costumes, their movements too artistic to arouse suspicion. Meanwhile, Beatrice's personal letters and the secret medical report began their trek from Paris. They were sewn into the lining of a ball gown, packed in a steamer trunk alongside the season's latest fashions. A lady's maid, hands trembling with the weight of her task, accompanied the trunk on the train to Geneva, passing through customs with the story of delivering a countess' wardrobe. The most dangerous cargo, the blackmail files and the annotated family tree, traveled with the head butler, Joseph. He carried them on his person, sewn into the lining of his greatcoat, taking a meandering, overnight train through the darkest valleys. He would have chosen a compartment with no other passengers, his face a mask of servant's neutrality, while his coat held the power to shatter empires. These separate streams of paper and peril all converged on one remote railway station, where a private carriage awaited for the final, winding ascent to the Chalet. Each document's journey was a calculated risk, a silent ballet of deception moving to the rhythm of steam trains and horse hooves. Every person involved, from the bribed courier to the silent coachman, became a link in a chain of secrecy, their cooperation secured by money, loyalty, or fear. What does it take to make a piece of paper disappear? It takes an entire, invisible army. Decades after the Chalet's secrets were sealed away, a new generation of detectives arrived, armed not with skeleton keys, but with spectral analysis and genetic science. These modern-day sleuths are historians, forensic archivists, and distant relatives like Clara, who inherited not just a property, but a profound responsibility. Their work is a painstaking archaeology of paper and ink, where every smudge of faded ink and every fiber of the paper itself becomes a clue. They operate in hushed library reading rooms and sterile laboratories, following a trail of whispers left on parchment. The first challenge is authentication, proving these documents are not elaborate forgeries themselves. Specialists use multispectral imaging, a technique that photographs pages under different wavelengths of light. What appears as a blank space to the human eye might reveal, under infrared light, the ghost of a different word, hastily erased and written over. A watermarked date on a sheet of paper can place it precisely in a specific mill and year, corroborating or contradicting the story it tells. The ink is analyzed for its chemical composition, matching it to known formulas used by stationers in Vienna or Paris during the correct era. Every detail is cross-referenced against shipping manifests, hotel registries, and society column reports, building a web of verifiable facts around the hidden narrative. The personal letters undergo a different kind of scrutiny. Graphologists analyze the pressure of the pen strokes and the slant of the handwriting, identifying moments of stress, excitement, or despair frozen in time. The very cadence of the language is studied, comparing the passionate letters to Emil with the restrained notes to her husband, confirming they were written by the same hand, but in vastly different emotional states. The most definitive proof, however, lies in the bloodline. DNA testing has become the ultimate arbiter of the Chalet's greatest secret, Alexander. Descendants of the family who raised him in the Swiss countryside provided voluntary DNA samples. These were compared against genetic material carefully extracted from sealed envelopes Beatrice had licked, and against a DNA profile constructed from living, known descendants of the von Amsberg line. The results were incontrovertible, a scientific confirmation of a story hidden for over a century. The data revealed a perfect genetic match, proving Alexander was indeed the son of Beatrice and the biological grandson of the railroad magnate, forever shattering the official family history. For these researchers, it is not enough to simply know the secrets. They must prove them beyond any reasonable doubt, transforming a family legend into a documented historical fact. How do you prove a truth that an entire powerful structure was built to deny? You use every tool across time, from the chemistry of ink to the very code of life itself. The discovery of these Alpine documents does more than rewrite a single family's history. It forces us to see the entire Gilded Age in a new, unforgiving light. We can no longer view the marriages of the dollar princesses as simple transactions where American cash purchased European class. These papers reveal them as high-stakes intelligence operations, where brides were not just assets, but potential liabilities. And every piece of personal correspondence was a piece of strategic leverage. The era was not a fairy tale. It was a Cold War fought in ballrooms and boudoirs, with entire dynasties hanging in the balance. For the specific royal families implicated, the impact is seismic. The von Amsberg name, and others like it, can no longer be framed as noble houses fallen on hard times. They are revealed as desperate institutions capable of systemic fraud, blackmail, and trafficking in looted art to maintain their crumbling facades. Their legacy is not one of dignified decline, but of a ruthless, often cruel, fight for survival that betrayed their own stated values of honor and bloodline purity. The romanticized image of European nobility is permanently tarnished, replaced by a portrait of profound moral compromise. For the dollar princesses themselves, the narrative shifts from passive victims to active, if trapped, participants. Beatrice was not merely pining away in a gilded cage. She was a financier, a spy, and a revolutionary in her own right, building a secret network to protect her child and reclaim her autonomy. Her story, and those of women like Eleanor, demonstrate a fierce, clandestine intelligence operating within a system designed to suppress it. They were not just heiresses, they were strategists in a hidden war, and their hidden documents are the unsent dispatches from the front line. On a broader scale, this forces historians to reconsider the very mechanics of power in that transitional period. The real political influence was not always in the public parliamentary debates, but in the secret treaties brokered by bankrupt counts in Alpine chalets. The flow of capital was not just in public stock offerings, but in the numbered Swiss accounts of countesses preparing to vanish. The documents prove that personal scandals were not separate from high politics. They were the engine of it, with the fate of empires sometimes resting on the secret of a single child's birth. What we call history is often just the official story, the version that the powerful manage to preserve. The truth, as these fragile papers testify, was often locked away in a trunk, waiting for the right key to turn. That locked trunk in the Swiss Alps held more than just papers. It contained an entire world of silenced truths, from forged passports to a lost prince's manifesto. Each document was a thread in a tapestry of human struggle against the gilded cages of power and expectation. This was not merely a story about royalty and heiresses. It was a profound lesson in the universal human desire to control our own narrative, no matter the cost. We all have our own secrets, our own hidden trunks, though perhaps on a smaller scale. The lengths to which Beatrice went to carve out a space of truth in a life built on lies speaks to something deep within all of us. The fundamental need to be known for who we truly are, not for the role we are forced to play. Her story, now pulled from the shadows, proves that history is not just written by the winners, but often hidden away by the quiet rebels. So the next time you find yourself in an attic or looking through an old family album, look a little closer. What letters are tucked away in the binding of a book? What stories are written in the faces of strangers in old photographs? Every family has its own hidden history, its own quiet chalets holding fragile truths. What forgotten story is waiting for you to uncover it? Share your own discoveries in the comments below, because every secret unearthed adds another piece to the grand, unfinished puzzle of our shared past.